On this episode of Breaking the Game, Austin and I will discuss our NBA player rankings. You don't want to miss out. Thank you for staying tuned, and we'll see you right after this break. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking the Game podcast. I am Stephen Gillespie, and joining me, as he always does, is my awesome co-host, Austin Carr. Austin, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Stephen. How about you?
I can't complain. Life is good, man. Kids are down. Talking NBA basketball with you today. I don't know how I can, tie a bow on a Sunday, as our buddy Couch Coach likes to say, any better than what we're doing today. What do we got on the docket for today, Austin?
Oh, it's a pretty exciting episode. We're kicking off our NBA rank series of shows here. We're going to kind of break it into groupings a little bit. We're doing our lower tiers today for this first edition of it. And, I know we're both pretty excited about it. We put a lot of work into this, so it should be a great show.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get going, our exclusive Off the Ball Network president, Chris LeBron, just came in to say sweet intro. I did put that to get together today. Austin, you had a busy day with family.
So a sweet intro.
You let me kind of tinker around a little bit. And I just want to shout out to our buddy, Jeff Hunt, our vice president, at Off the Ball Network. Just appreciate him continuing to inspire me. Pretty much every time I see him do something, I'm like, man, I want to try my hand at that. So he's the reason that I sat down today and made that intro video. So shout out to our president, Jeff.
Well, you did an awesome job on it. I loved it. As soon as I watched it the first time, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to try to change it at all. It looks great to me. It's 10 times better than anything I could do. So you did an awesome job.
Well, I appreciate it. It was a lot easier than I anticipated it. So it's not like I didn't do a lot of the graphic design or anything like that, but I, did a little cut and paste and spent some time on it.
But still pretty cool.
I'll take the compliment, though. I sure as heck will. But it's a busy day in the world of sports right now. We're coming off the tail end of college football yesterday, and there's a big game slated for this evening. So whoever's tuning in, really appreciate the time. Right. That must mean that you love basketball just as much as we do. And we got a fun episode today where, as we keep alluding to, we're going to be talking about our NBA rankings, where instead of just going down 1 through 125 players, which I know, Austin, you did kind of do that. What we're going to be focused on for this exercise is tier grouping. Austin, what are we looking for when we evaluated these tiers? What was kind of your thought process?
Well, for me, a lot of it came down to, just the role that I think a lot of these guys play. And I do kind of have my lowest grouping tier named great role players. So it's, makes it kind of connotes that they're bench guys. But to be honest, almost every guy that we ended up evaluating is pretty much a starter or sixth man on their team. If you think about it, we each did around 125. I think you did a little bit more than that. If you break that down, that's about the 4 best players on every team if they were even. So we're not really getting too much into the bench guys, but there are some. And I just said great role players because I do think that a lot of times the 4th or 5th starters, or sometimes the 3rd or 4th guy on a team can be a great role player. And that's what the difference is between sometimes a championship team and just a really good team, is guys that are willing to play their role. But for me, a big part of what I use to determine where I put everybody is just kind of advanced statistics. I went off of per game averages for a lot of stats. I went off of, a lot of advanced stuff. And then there were some where I just thought about it in my head. Like, honestly, if watching these 2 guys play, are they, do they belong in the same group? And so it was fun. It was an interesting way to kind of do it. It kind of opened my eyes to some things. It was definitely one of the challenges was trying to, put your fandom aside, which I'm sure, wasn't easy for you either. It was definitely something I struggled with a little bit. But once I got going, it wasn't too bad. So yeah, I kind of just did a lot of my analysis based on the numbers.
Yeah, and we're a pretty analytical group, I would like to say, Austin. You and I, we look at numbers, but a lot of what else went into this for me was, and this went into it for you too, was the eye test, right? Like when we sat here before we even came up with names for the categories, we were like, all right, who are the groups of players, that kind of fit together, who basically gives you that same type of dynamic or the same boost to overall team performance. Like how much does this player impact winning, for lack of a better term, right? In the most simplest form, how much does this player improve your team's chance of winning, making the playoffs, winning a championship, right? So not all the players that we have, for instance, right? Like for you have fringe starters as the lowest, or I'm sorry, you have fringe starters as your second lowest tier, right? And you have 8 tiers altogether. I have 6, right? And that's just how, we didn't plan it that way. That's just how we perceive the game, how we perceive these players, right? But you have fringe starters on here. Not all of the players that you have under fringe starters actually start in the NBA, right? And some of your role players have bigger roles than they probably should, right? But you think that the best fit for them in the NBA is where you have them in your tiers, right, Austin?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it has to do with just, like I said, player efficiency rating was a big one that went into it for me, as well as wins above replacement. Those were kind of the two factors where I looked at a guy and it's like, well, his numbers overall aren't anywhere near what this guy's numbers are. But then if you look at, how much each player actually impacted their team's performance and really how many wins they added to their team, and if those were closer than say a lot of the traditional stats, I think that kind of helped me move guys around in terms of grouping, where it might surprise some people, some of the decisions I made, but a lot of them, that was the the thinking behind those. So if it seems like I have some guys that don't belong together in certain groups, or they're maybe the name of the group doesn't exactly quite fit how you view that player, there is a reason behind all of it. So
yeah, and same with me. And the fun thing about this is that we didn't agree on everything, obviously, right? Just like most people who are going to be watching or listening now or later, they're not going to agree. They're going to have their arguments. But what I would encourage them to do, one, is to understand that they're probably wrong. Just kidding. But honestly, though, hit us up on Twitter. Austin, you can follow him at AustinCar10. You can follow me at Steven BTG, and let us know what you think. Hit us up with the hashtag BTG NBA rank, which obviously stands for breaking the game, right? So it's going to be a fun little way that you can interact with us. But this graphic that we have displayed on the screen, you folks listening right now can't see it, obviously, but the 2 tiers that Austin's going to be bringing up, and we're going to be kind of dissecting who he has under here. The lowest one is great role players. Austin, who do you have on this kind of starting 5 that you have on this graphic here?
Well, it was kind of interesting that you pointed that out to me when I was making these the other night. I just kind of did it that way and it worked out, so I ran with it. But the guys I have on the actual image here are Terrence Ross of the Orlando Magic, Tyler Hero, the Miami Heat, Seth Curry of the Dallas Mavericks, Michael Porter Jr. of the Denver Nuggets, and JJ Redick of the New Orleans Pelicans. So that's the guys I have on the actual image. The group itself has quite a few more players. Great role players. I actually have 33 listed on my list. So you can jump right into them if you want me to, or you can give me your thoughts before we get started, whatever you want to do.
Well, I just want to cover these graphics real quick. You have for the people who are listening that can't watch right now, Austin, we'll kind of let them know kind of what we're looking at right now. Your next tier that you have, your 7th tier, working your way up, or the fringe starters. Who do you have on your graphic here?
For the fringe starters, I have LaMarcus Aldridge of the Spurs, Victor Oladipo of the Pacers, Karis LeVert of the Nets, TJ Warren of the Pacers, and Goran Dragic of the Miami Heat. Thank you for pointing that out for me. I didn't think to do both at once.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine, because we're gonna roll from this graphic into ours and then get the fun discussion out of the way. But I just wanted to point out that you have a little bit of your homer showing right now with 2 Pacers on your starting lineup for your.
Trust me, it was hard not to put them all in the same. I almost put all 5 of the starting 5 in the same group. Just about.
Oh, there you go.
And I realized, man, I'm kind of just bunching these Pacers up.
Yeah, and I'm obviously not going to cover all the players that I have here on this graphic. No, I mean, because I'm basically going to read the same list of names here in a minute anyway. But, I have this little graphic that I designed, and just for people listening right now who can't see, I got folks like my glue guy of the year, Marcus Smart's on here. My 6th man of the year, Montrezl Harrell, is on here. One of my candidates for most improved players next season, OG Anunoby's on here. Maxi Kleber, I'm a big fan of him. I got Goran Dragic and Tyler Hero, some names already mentioned that you had there, Austin. But we'll go ahead and roll right into it. We're gonna
that's not actually watching, that can't see it. He's got every single player in his group on there. It's a tiny little image, like he said. It's pretty awesome. He did a good job on it.
Well, I appreciate it.
Don't let him undersell himself.
I put way too much time in there probably, but I do it for our fans, and I do it for you, man. I bring my A game whenever we hit this show. So
I appreciate it. I try to keep up with you.
Right on. Well, here, we're going to go ahead and make this graphic bigger for the folks watching right now. We're just going to burn through this list of names. We're not going to talk about everybody extensively here on the show because we just don't have the time right now. So I'm going to go ahead and blow this image up real quick.
Cool.
Austin, on your lowest tier, your great role players. Do you want to read the names, or do you want me to?
I'll just go ahead and read through the list.
Okay.
I've got Serge Ibaka, Davis Bertans, Kendrick Nunn, Marcus Morris, Will Barton, Brandon Clark, Michael Porter Jr., Duncan Robinson, J.J. Redick, Hassan Whiteside, Aaron Gordon, Paul Millsap, Lowry Markkinen, Joe Harris, Marquise Chris, Harrison Barnes, Terrence Ross, Elfrid Payton, Seth Curry, Larry Nance Jr., Tyler Hero, Lonzo Ball, Wendell Carter Jr., Mitchell Robinson, P.J. Washington, Monty Morris, DeJounte Murray, Kyle Kuzma, Derek Jones Jr., Jordan Clarkson, George Hill, Rudy Gay, and Josh Richardson.
That's an interesting group of names. I'm going to, be a little bit redundant here in a second when I give my tiers before we let you or after you reveal your second tier here, because the way that we're doing this, and it'll make sense the more that we do this, obviously, as we reveal more tiers, we want to have kind of roughly the same amount of players here. Austin's got about 63 players that kind of combined from his 2 lowest tiers. My lowest tier only consists of 48. So nothing real clean cut, but when we start talking about, how these players impact winning, like we kind of alluded to earlier, it'll start making more sense and it'll start flowing a little bit. We just got to do a little bit of this dirty work up front, right?
Right. Get this all out of the way so we can get into the actual discussion.
Yep. And who's your tier 7 here?
My tier 7 is called Fringe Starters, and you'll notice pretty quick off the bat that not all these guys actually are starters, but we'll get into that. We got Goran Dragic, Devontae Graham, Gordon Hayward, LaMarcus Aldridge, Dennis Schroeder, Eric Bledsoe, TJ Warren, Victor Oladipo, Evan Fournier, Kelly Oubre Jr., Marvin Bagley, Clint Capella, DeAndre Ayton, Karis LeVert, Lou Williams, Miles Turner, Terry Rozier, Robert Covington, Alec Burks, Ricky Rubio, Mike Conley Jr., Steven Adams, Jared Allen, Brooke Lopez, OG Anunoby, Dylan Brooks, Tim Hardaway Jr., Al Horford, Norman Powell, and Bogdan Bogdanovic.
Yes, that's the Sacramento Bogdanovic,
yes,
right?
It is.
There you go.
It helped me out with that one earlier today.
That was funny. The way that message you sent me earlier said, make sure that the graphic says the Sacramento Bogdanovic. I loved it. It was great. So when you were putting this list together, were you surprised that maybe some of the names that made the list, or maybe some of the names that didn't, already at the low end of at your tiers here?
I was, actually. There was a few guys in these 2 tiers, really, honestly, more so in tier 7. There were a couple guys in that list that, before I really looked into the advanced stats, probably wouldn't even have made my list just off the top of my head if I was just thinking about it. So it was interesting, Hassan Whiteside in tier 8 and the great role players was one that I think is probably going to, kind of possibly differ from your list. He's one that I was surprised to see how much of a positive impact he actually made this past year. So I think he kind of brought himself back onto this top 100 and whatever list of mine based off of where he was a few years before that. I probably wouldn't have put him on there, but last year he did, by the numbers, have a pretty good year. And then the Fringe Starters group, tier 7, a couple of them that I was pretty surprised with when I actually looked up their numbers were Alec Burks was one of them. Yeah. He was one that I really wouldn't even have thought of to even add to my list at all, probably just off the top of my head. But when I looked into it, his defensive stats, kind of the advanced metrics on his defensive, value to his team, I think is kind of what pushed him into that group for me. And just he compared favorably with a lot of the other names that I have in this group. So that's why he made it into tier 7 instead of tier 8.
Okay, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just you have 63 players that you're going to be discussing.
Mm-hmm.
I have 48. So we're going to see some names, not on my list that were on yours. And there's going to be names on my list that you had, right? So
Right.
it's going to allow us to kind of disagree playfully
Mm-hmm.
here a little bit. But I'll go ahead and reveal my lowest tier, tier 6, which I refer to as the steady starter group. This consists of Goran Dragic, Lou Williams, Clint Capella, Marcus Smart, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jordan Clarkson, Mike Connolly Jr., Al Horford, OG Anunoby, Maxi Kleba, Michael Porter Jr., Christian Wood, Robert Covington, PJ Tucker, Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, Brandon Clark, Tyler Hero, Brooke Lopez, Eric Bledsoe, Lonzo Ball, RJ Barrett, Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, Josh Richardson, Kelly Oubre Jr., Carmelo Anthony, Buddy Hield, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, Davis Bertans, Andre Drummond, Will Barton, Jeremy Grant, Blake Griffin, JJ Redick, Mitchell Robinson, Jonathan Isaacs, Marvin Bagley III, Bojan Bogdanovic from Utah, Montrezl Harrell, Jonas Valanciunas, Daniel Tice, Joe Harris, and then finishing it up with Seth Curry. Are there any names that are excluded or on there that you're kind of surprised about?
Not one that I'm really was surprised about, but one that I noticed off the bat that I don't have is Marc Gasol. And for anybody listening or watching, the main reason I don't have him on my list is because I last I heard he was going overseas to play in Spain. So if he comes back and confirms that he's going to play this year again in the NBA, I might rethink adding him on at a later time when we revisit this whenever we do.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't really have any gripes about anybody on your list. There's a few probably that I would maybe consider moving up a little bit higher that I think I have higher in my rankings than you do.
Those
Buddy Hield is one I think I might have had higher than you. He might. I think he's one for sure that I had higher. One that I didn't have on my list at all that didn't make my list is Jeremy Grant, and I think that probably would surprise some people. But again, it was just I had to cut my list off somewhere, and he was probably right down towards the next group of guys that would make it in. Other guys that I definitely had higher than you, I think Christian Wood is one that I had the next group up from you that we'll talk about on our next show or whenever we get to the next groupings. But for the most part, we have a lot of overlap, which I expected. And you do have a few guys that I left off, and I think a few guys that I, valued a little bit higher than you, or you valued higher than me. But overall, it's a solid group. There's nothing I have like a big, huge gripe about, really.
Yeah, I have one name that kind of confused me a little bit on your end is Hassan Whiteside, right? And now I know that his statistics look some type of way, but when you actually watch Hassan Whiteside play, how does the game film compare to the statistics that you see from him? I mean, obviously he has to do something to have numbers recorded, right? Because that's all stats are is, actually logging what's happening during the game. But what do you think about his effort? Do you think it's consistent with the statistics?
I think this past season, for the most part, that it was. Obviously he's not going to be worth the kind of contract that he did get at once upon a time with the Miami Heat. And I think that was a big part of the knock on him was that he wasn't worth the huge amount of money that he was getting paid because, he kind of got that contract right towards the end of the, era of big, slow centers like that. Not big, slow centers, but guys that are, more going to plant themselves in the post and play the game that way. That's just not really the way it's played anymore. But, last season, this past season with Portland, he averaged 3 blocks per game, which was tops in the NBA. 15 points and 13 and a half rebounds. That's, crazy numbers. He's a double machine. His player efficiency rating is actually 25, which is significantly
certainly
higher.
Above average. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's significantly higher than a lot of guys that I actually, put on the list. Not a lot of guys, but several players that I have ahead of him. Actually, their player efficiency rating isn't near that high. And I know that stat's not perfect and it's not everything, but it is something that I use to kind of, rank where I felt players belonged. And he was definitely one I was surprised about when I looked into, his win shares this year were 8.5, which is high. His offensive win shares 5.6 and 3 on the defensive end. He affects the game on both sides of the court, I think, a lot. And that's just kind of, when I really dived into the numbers, he was one that I was surprised about when I first looked at it, but he did have a great year last year, and that's why I thought he belonged in my group.
Okay. One name that you have lower than where I have, and considering that you have more players listed here, it's a little bit surprising to me. Maybe he's in the next tier up for me, right? And again, like I didn't actually like numerically value each player, kind of like how you did. For people who haven't had access, obviously, to Austin's notes, he actually has them listed numerically and broken up in the tiers, whereas I just broke them down in the tiers. But to me, it seems like you're kind of undervaluing Gordon Hayward a little bit. Now, look at the numbers. Obviously, he's only going to be able to do so much, right? Because he's playing alongside, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Kemba Walker, all of those names we're going to be talking about, in future episodes, right? How much did playing time, come into consideration for you when you thought about Gordon Hayward as kind of a fringe starter? Because that's exactly what he was in Boston. But do you think that that's his ideal role in the NBA?
Honestly, I do think on a different team that he would have a bigger role, and I think a bigger role would probably suit him. To be honest, he is a fairly efficient player with the role that he has now. His player efficiency rating was about 18, which is a little bit above average. But like that's kind of where that's kind of where I grouped him for that. Was there. He is a solid rebounder. He's pretty good on terms of assists, about 4 assists per game, 7 rebounds. He's one that I kind of struggled with where to place. I think injuries kind of, the idea that he's not healthy all the time kind of creeped into my mind too when placing him. At his full potential in the right system, in the right, situation with a full healthy season, I could see him vaulting up this list if we do it again next year for sure. If he does get a trade or gets, decides to opt out of his contract or whatever he decides to do there. I think ultimately, Boston's not the best location for him right now, at least the way they're constructed.
Right.
So
too many mouths to feed. Yeah.
Right. It did play a part for sure, but it was more so just, I think, health than possibly, really playing time or role, because I think, in my mind, at least in a bigger role, I think he would do even more. So it was just kind of a, show me you can do it and stay healthy for a full year, and then we'll come back and revisit it kind of thing.
Okay. And then another name that kind of similar thing for me, TJ Warren. He had a big showing in Orlando during the bubble, put up a lot of big games until he faced Jimmy Butler, which, Mo Murphy, who's another vice president here on the network, he and I kind of co-signed on TJ Warren getting clamped down by Jimmy Buckets. But other than that, TJ Warren looked like his role stepped up a lot. There's speculation, obviously, that Miles Turner may be moving on in a trade, maybe for even Gordon Hayward, who we just talked about. For TJ Warren, you have him under your fringe starter category. What kind of held him back from you putting him up, more high than I had him?
Well, honestly, I think I tried really hard not to be a prisoner of the moment and not to have, recency bias when looking at how I ranked him for the whole year. And yeah, he had a great second half of the season. He had a great year all around for most of the season.
Yeah.
But his numbers compare pretty similarly to Gordon Hayward's. He's not quite the rebounder, not quite the playmaker, but he scored a little bit more. But the player efficiency and the win shares were pretty even. I do think he kind of had a little bit of a breakout year this year. And if some things go right for him and he ends up as the undisputed, I guess, number one guy there in terms of the offense for the Pacers, or whatever happens with that, if they, continue to use him in that role that they did in the bubble, then he could move up this list too. But just looking at the overall body of work from the whole season and how everything happened throughout the whole year, and not just since the restart, is kind of what kept him down in the tier that I have him in tier 7.
Okay. Going down to tier 8, a guy that I love, I just could not include him in my bottom tier, right? And this is a great exercise. And for anybody watching or listening, I would kind of encourage you, if you're a big fan of the NBA, like try to sit down and do this, right? Because you'll have to remove your bias, or you don't have to, but I would encourage you to remove your bias.
It makes it much more, interesting to see if you actually are willing to do that.
Right. Yeah. And if you can, take off your fan shades and, put on your, just critical analysis sunglasses for, just being real nerdy here. a guy that I love, Kendrick Nunn. I actually named him to one of my defensive teams mid-season. Now again, you have more players than me, so you're gonna have more names than I do. But Kendrick Nunn, you put him under great role players. What about Kendrick Nunn makes him, in that category to be a great role player?
Well, I think, actually, I think he did start a number of games for that Heat team throughout the year. He on a championship contending level team, or like where the Heat are going to be possibly this season, if not, where they want to be next year. I think ultimately his best spot with this team is coming off the bench as their sixth man. And, just typical sixth man to me is, a guard similar to Kendrick Nunn, just the way he scores a lot off the bench. He's kind of instant offense, 16 points a game or 15.5. His assist numbers weren't great, only 3 assists per game, but, he was a rookie guard, which, rookie guards tend to struggle in the NBA. He's a little bit of an older rookie, so I think the ceiling is kind of, lower on him. You kind of know what you're going to get.
Right.
I'd like to see the player efficiency rating go up some. It was only 13, just below average. But, he played a pretty meaningful role for a pretty good team in the Heat for most of the season. He kind of lost that role when the season restarted, partially due to health and partially just, he struggled in the bubble after the restart. But he kind of found it again towards the end of the finals. And he's somebody that I'm a little bit high on. He might have been a little bit more projection than current, real statistics, but he was a pretty decent 3-point shooter. Not a amazing shooter from, the rest of the field, just pretty average overall there. But, I just saw the 15 points per game. He kind of, ran the offense when he was out there. I could see him pretty much growing into, one of the better six men in the NBA.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like I said, I'm a fan of him, and I misspoke earlier. I said I named him to the defensive team. I meant the rookie team, obviously. Defense is not his strong suit, but like you said, he's kind of a, spark plug off the bench, can cook a little bit. Now, one player that you and I agreed on that maybe some are kind of projecting to be more high than where he is a pretty polarizing guy, Michael Porter Jr. His name has kind of been circulating a lot, especially in trade rumors lately. It's great to me to see that we agree that, the potential didn't overtake us in our analysis of this guy, right? Like,
right.
We still don't have a whole lot of basketball that we can evaluate on the professional level to know exactly where he's going to peg to be. Potentially, I think that he could jump, maybe into 2 tiers for me down the line, right? But
definitely.
When you take potential out of it, how did you take that sobering look at Michael Porter Jr. and where you had him placed?
Well, for me, it was kind of easy, to be honest. He's a fairly incomplete player. He's a dangerous scorer already. Yes. Obviously his offensive game is pretty polished and pretty well rounded. He has, a decent shot. He's got size and athleticism. So, everything you see there, you like, but on the defensive end, he leaves a ton to be desired. And in my mind, a lot of it's just, want to and effort at this point. And a lot of it is just knowledge too. These guys have to learn really how to defend at the NBA level, because it is a lot different than pretty much any other type of basketball you can imagine. So, a lot of it is just a learning curve, but I think he's got the ability to become a great defender, or at least a very solid defender, maybe not elite, but a good enough to not be a negative on that end. But this year, as of right now, the way his game is, he is a negative on the defensive end in my eyes. And so I think that kind of, helped balance out the potential on the offensive end that you do see from this guy. And I did, kind of like you said, I tried really hard to not let, the potential kind of blind me when I was looking at players like this, and not try to really, not really try to, I can't think of the word, prognosticate.
Feelings,
Thank you. Yeah. Prognosticate too much. I didn't want to, look too far into the future, more of just kind of right now.
Understandable. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm scanning through these lists, right? And it looks, we agree a lot on our show, right? So
we definitely do.
We do. And even in these differences, like I can see where you have a guy on your list like higher than me, like Monty Morris. He didn't make my cut into my lowest tier. I actually have a 7th tier that I just just kind of threw away, he is in that tier, right? That tier consists of 58 players. So if you thought my graphic had a lot of players on it earlier,
right.
if I did tier 7, it would have been insane. Like
I think overall, before you cut it down some, I think you actually evaluated a few more players than I did total. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't have an established count yet. I think the last time I actually took count, it was 148, but I think I added and took away players, so I don't know exactly where that hard number is at, right? But Monte Morris is another player that I really like. I think that every NBA team needs a Monte Morris, right? Where he's a great 3-point shooter for one. He is also, if you just watch him play basketball, he is just a basketball player. To me, you have him under great role players. To me, I would even consider him maybe even a fringe starter. And I know that that's kind of, dissecting it probably a little too much. I'm sure he was kind of hard for you to place there. But when I considered my last category is steady starters, obviously when I'm thinking of steady starters, he doesn't make there. But when I look at your fringe starters / great role player, I could see that he's right on the line for you. What is there to like so much about Monte Morris for an NBA team?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Every team wants a Monte Morris, on their bench or on their roster, in their rotation, whatever you want to call it. He just doesn't make mistakes. He's a kind of a no negatives player all across the board. He doesn't really have any one skill or ability that super jumps out at you, but he's always available. For the most part in his career, he's been extremely healthy. It's been a short career, but he played all 82 games in 2018-19, played 73 games last year. So he's relatively available for the team. His per 36 numbers, just kind of going off of those because his usage rate and his role isn't super huge right now. I mean, 22 minutes a game isn't anything to laugh at, but if he were getting, those kind of starters minutes, lead guard minutes, you're looking at about 14.5 points per game, 5.6 assists, only 3 rebounds, but it's
not terrible for his size. I was going to
say, for the size that he is, that's pretty good. 1.2 steals, only 1.2 turnovers. So, his assist to turnover ratio is almost 5-1.
Right.
So, that's really, really good. That's
a starting quarterback for all you NFL fans out there, right?
Right.
Like that's your franchise quarterback.
There you go. Good analogy. He shoots over 80% from the free throw line. He shoots, almost 40% for his career from 3, 37% this year. The advanced numbers were pretty good on him. His value over, a replacement level player, which, 0 is kind of the considered replacement level. He's only about a 1, but, 75% of the guys in the NBA that are above 0 are between like 1 and 2.5 on that stat. So it's not super low or anything. 1 doesn't sound like anything great, but it is pretty solid. Almost 4 win shares this year, and his usage rate's about 17.5%. So that's, pretty much in line for a backup point guard.
For a second unit, that's pretty solid.
Right. And if you can get those kind of numbers out of your backup, guy running the offense for your second unit, I think any team in the NBA would love to have a guy like that. And he just, like I said, he doesn't do anything, incredibly well, but he does everything pretty well. He does everything good.
He's just a safe player all around. And you consider too that Denver Nuggets team where you got so many ball handlers on that team, right? With Jokic, with Murray, with Barton, with Michael Porter Jr. coming into the fold. There's ball handlers all over that team. And the fact that Monte Morris, who was undrafted, right, came into the NBA, I believe out of Iowa State, if I'm wrong, let me know. I don't think I am, right? But I think he came out of Iowa State. I'm pretty sure he did. But come undrafted out of Iowa State, surrounded by ball handlers, to come in and still get a usage rate of 17%. And that has increased over time. So he has gained the trust of Mike Malone, who is not he doesn't really coddle the younger players, right? We were talking about that earlier with Michael Porter Jr. Morris had to earn those minutes, right? So to me, it just speaks to the type of player that he is. He's like we mentioned, he's your dream backup point guard who could come in and give you minutes as a starter if there's injury or if you need to rest. And he's going to take care of the basketball. He's going to make efficient plays. His defense leaves a little bit to be desired, but I mean, if you're your backup point guard, he's very capable at that spot.
Right. And he was the 51st overall pick in his draft 3 years ago. So, anytime you can get even like a capable rotation player at that point in the draft is awesome. And to get somebody that's, as important to that second unit as he is, that's definitely a plus for them.
Yeah, and thank you for correcting me. I believe I said that he was undrafted. He almost was, but he was a late second round.
Close to the end of the draft. You were right, though. He did go to Iowa State. So.
Right. And this gives me an opportunity to go ahead and give myself what we like to call on our network a cheap plug, right? You were talking about earlier how, at 51, it's hard to grab a rotational player. I just wrote an article over the weekend where we discussed, how confident you as an NBA fan should be at where your team is selecting this year based off of how they drafted at that exact same spot in previous years. There were only 4 teams that have never drafted where they're drafting this season, and your Indiana Pacers were excluded from the list because they do not have a first round draft pick, right? So if you don't believe us, and if you do believe us, go reaffirm your belief or go affirm your belief in us by going to offtheballnetwork.com, checking out that article, and you will see how teams
it's a good read for sure. You did a good job with it, man. I checked it out. I liked it a lot.
I appreciate it. I called it trivia night in a lot of segments just because some of these names you're like, who in the world has read more? Right. So
I know you and I both are two people that feel like we, know the history of the game pretty well. And there was a ton of names in that article that I'd never even heard of.
Yeah, I think the Utah Jazz was the only team that I read in that grouping of names that I was like, I know every player on this list. So it was a fun exercise to go back and kind of sharpen, the knowledge of the draft.
Mm-hmm. Hey, there was a name on here that I noticed that you don't have at all that I kind of wanted to ask you about is Terry Rozier.
Yeah.
I actually had him all the way up in fringe starters, tier 7. I looking at it now and going back and looking at his stats, I kind of feel like he belongs in tier 8 for me. I'm not 100% sure how he ended up in 7, but he definitely belongs on my list. And I noticed I didn't see his name on yours at all.
Well, yeah, and just for again the listeners and the viewers right now, to my defense, you do have about 15 more players than me, right? So so the name fell off. Now, what's crazy about Terry Rozier is that if he was playing in Boston in the role that he had on that team, he probably would have made this list. But to me, a lot of things went into factoring for Terry Rozier. One, he got out of Boston to get a chance to become a starting point guard in Charlotte in that sign and trade that they got for Kemba Walker, right? So a lot of the fact that he went into Charlotte, job in hand, it's almost like a quarterback competition, right? Like he went into Charlotte job in hand, and then they actually had to slide him over to the starting 2 guard spot for Devontae Graham, who also did not make my list. Both of these guys made it in tier 7. Graham made it basically for efficiency, right? I believe he was my most improved player simply because in literally every category he improved the most at every one of those, right? And Terry Rozier, a lot of it was, the lack of a role. I don't believe in a dual point guard backcourt, right? And if you look at my tier 6, header here, it's a steady starters. I don't consider Terry Rozier to be a steady starter, right? He would have made your great role players list, right? So I think that even fringe starter, I didn't have too much complaints about you even having him at fringe starter, right? But when I'm considering steady starters, Terry Rozier doesn't strike me as that player, right? Because he lost basically his starting point guard position this season to an undrafted player who.
It's a good point, yeah. And I didn't really think about the fact that you don't have really a category for role players or bench guys like I kind of do. So it does make sense that, with, steady starters, I wouldn't really classify him as that either. So, that makes sense. I think what I was looking at that maybe pushed him into the tier 7 for me instead of tier 8 is just the 18 points a game, 4.4 rebounds, four assists. Those are pretty solid counting stats, not probably for, a high level starting point guard in the NBA, but I don't think that's what his best role is either. I'm kind of with you on that. So he was one that, I was iffy about at first, but he ended up, kind of convincing me when I looked into the total numbers of everything about him. So I was just kind of curious what you felt about him.
Yeah. And like I said, under fringe starter, I buy that for $1. You know what I mean? But and you brought up the 18 points per game. Now, Austin, do you think that 18 points per game for a starting point guard is different on the Charlotte Hornets as opposed to, let's say, the the Los Angeles Lakers, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I think if you look at, I'm sure if I looked at his usage rate real quick right now, it's probably fairly high for the kind of numbers that he has. You know, it's almost 25%,
Right.
which is high for, you know, kind of the numbers that he did put up. But he's not really, you know, super inefficient or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, his true shooting isn't incredible, but he's gotten better pretty much every year. And I kind of do still think maybe he's a little bit on the rise. We haven't quite seen his peak just yet.
Sure.
But still, you know, I tried pretty hard not to put too much projection into this. So, you know, like I said, he's probably right on the line between 7 and 8 for me, but he definitely, you know, belongs in on the list for me. I'm kind of surprised looking back at it now that I had him in 7 and not down to 8, but
yeah, I mean, and that's fine. Now, one player that, you know, well, let's just say 2 seasons ago, this player probably would have been significantly higher on the list. One, because of the role that he had, and 2, because, you know, you could just project the potential out, you know, with the type of, you know, scheme that was kind of built around him and, you know, other young players. But that's Kyle Kuzma. You have Kyle on your tier 8, right? Mine's tier 6, steady starters. We would both agree, obviously, that he is not in that category. I mean, if we're looking at categories, you have him listed as a great role player, which I do feel like is an appropriate assessment. How much of this, I don't want to say I'm not even going to say it because it's just too, you know, clickbaity of me to say, right? But playing alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis, it's long been accounted that the third option for a LeBron James led team has to make a lot of sacrifices. You could even argue that he fell out of even that third option role. That was kind of third option by committee, you know, almost like a great running back stable, right? So I'm trying to sprinkle in these football analogies for all these fans.
You're doing a good job. I like
the game here in, you know, 18 minutes. We're going to watch the Bucks and the Saints play, right? So
there you go.
So Kyle Kuzma, where he is right now on this list, one, how much of it is due to the fact of the system that he's in and the players that he's playing alongside, and 2, like, how disappointing is it that he is so low?
Well, honestly, it's definitely disappointing that he hasn't kind of, you know, lived up to the expectations that he set for himself, you know, definitely as a rookie and even last year. You know, his numbers were way down this year, but I do think kind of a change of scenery might be great for him. I think it could vault him back up, you know, a little bit higher on this list. But he definitely belongs where you and I both put him, you know, towards in our bottom tiers, just based on his performance this last year. And he's the type of player that, you know, you don't really want to build an offensive set around. He kind of does a better job being that slasher, kind of getting to play off the ball a little bit, kind of create his own kind of thing. But I just think that's, there you go, off the ball. I just, you know, accidental plug. There you go.
There you go.
But, you know, I just feel like he is in a kind of a bad situation there in LA, playing behind LeBron and AD. You know, he's kind of the same size basically as those guys. He plays around the same position, really, if you want to be honest about it. I know LeBron was a point guard a lot this year, but he's going to be you know, a little bit bigger wing player that's, you know, not really a post guy, but, you know, definitely not a guard. He kind of doesn't really fit with LeBron and AD, I don't think. And I just don't know what it was about him this year. He didn't seem like he wanted to kind of take over as that 6-man role, which I think it was there for him to take.
Sure.
You know, he started some, but he also came off the bench, you know, pretty often as well. And I just, you know, I was disappointed in how he played this year, but I think that's definitely, you know, reflected in where I put him on the list. And potentially, could he go a lot higher on this list? I think so. I think Michael Porter Jr. and him are 2 of the guys on on this list, just off the top of my head, that have good chance of really moving up if things go the right way for them.
I would throw Brandon Clark and OG Anunoby.
Yeah, I was just thinking OG too.
I have OG a little bit higher, or no, actually, I'm sorry, he's in this tier 6 as well. We both have OG and Brandon Clark, and Tyler Hero is another guy too, right? So like, there's a couple of key, like, that's a good starting 5 if you're building off of potential, and you could throw Mitchell Robinson in that mix too, right? Like, there's a lot of intriguing young guys that, whether it be opportunity, whether it be that they're rookies in the NBA. I mean, there's a lot to be said about the youth that we have on these tiers. That it'll be fun. It'll be a fun exercise when we do this, say 3 years from now, and see where we have them.
Right. I definitely agree. Kyle Kuzma, I think, is just kind of interesting because I think, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, but I think if you and I did this list his rookie year and then as well last year and then again this year, if this was like the third year we'd done it, I would say he'd be a lot higher, on the previous 2 seasons than he has on this year's list. At least for me, he would have been. He definitely lost himself some spots by his play.
I think that I probably would have projected him to be a steady starter because that's what he was for LA. Like, they weren't winning a lot with him and Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram as kind of their feature pieces, right? But they were kind of had a Showtime feel, and
right. But
there was a debate on when bringing in Anthony Davis, do you trade Kyle Kuzma or keep him? Like, he was the guy that you were kind of like, no, we can't afford to lose Kyle Kuzma because he's probably going to step up and be, a pretty solid contributor.
Right. I was definitely in that boat as well. I was one of the people saying, I definitely can't give up him and Brandon Ingram. Kuzma was kind of the stopping point for as what they could get in terms of, players for that trade. But I do also feel like, once the pressure kind of really showed up in LA, once LeBron came, and it wasn't just, a bunch of young rookie players, showing what they've got and trying to grow together and nobody expected anything of. As soon as the expectations were there, it kind of seems like Kuzma hasn't been able to handle that in terms of, just overall production. So maybe there's something to be said there too.
But he is an NBA champion. So
he
does have that feather in his cap.
Despite the petitions and what everybody else said and wanted, he was one that honestly I had to put my Laker fandom, to the side. I had to like consciously tell myself like, hey, he's not as bad as you think he is, just because you watched him all year,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, are there any other names? Like, I could see just on my list alone, like I could see people bringing up a guy like a Blake Griffin, saying that I have him a little bit too low as a steady starter. Just kind of reasoning for their injuries have taken a serious toll on the Blake Griffin, and we don't know what he's even going to look like next year. Like, this could be kind of generous where I have him, with the amount of injuries that he's had.
Well, if it turns out that your ranking of him is generous, then people freak out when they see where I have him on the list, because I kind of project him to come back fairly where he was, and if it's close to the season before he got hurt, then that was arguably the best Blake Griffin that we've seen. So even if he's 85% of that guy when he comes back, which I think is realistic and on a good, one of the better case scenarios, I actually have him a couple tiers ahead of these two. So that's one I'm kind of interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are certain aspects of Blake's game that I think will age despite athleticism. Like, he grew as a playmaker in Detroit, which was awesome to see. He grew as an outside shooter in Detroit, which was awesome to see. And,
right. Him and D Rose together, baby.
Yeah, they both of those, in 2008 and 9, right? Like, they were like top 5 in MVP. Like, and the world was their oyster once upon a time.
Think about how athletic those two guys were at the beginning of their careers, and like just where their careers have taken them. It's crazy to think about.
And how poetic is it that they're on the same team right now?
Both, before Griffin's injury, both playing a lot better than I think people really were expecting from him.
Yeah, and for those who see this list or listening to us talk about Derrick Rose, today is not going to be the last day that you hear his name, at least for myself, and it looks like for you as well, Austin.
Yeah, we've got several more of these to go through, so I think it'll be even kind of more fun to see our next the next tiers up where we have guys ranked and the differences and similarities that we have in the tiers to come up for sure. I know once we get to the very, very top, we're pretty similar, but I think you could probably expect that from just about anybody that does a ranking like this.
Well, I mean, I will say that, right? But yeah, so we just completed tier 6 for myself. We threw tier 7 and 8 together for you. That's going to leave you with tier 6. As far as player groupings go, are you going to kind of have another combined grouping based on our list? Are you going to reveal 6 and 5 together, or just 6? Like
I'd probably do 6 and 5 together. I think that would get us caught up.
Yep. Because I'd be on tier 5.
Same number, and 5 and 6 are both significantly smaller than the 2 groups that we went over today. For me, you know, I don't have the exact number right here, but the names for them are high end starters and capable starters for me. So
yeah,
and mine are definitely not as big.
My next tier is super starters, right? So like that's it'll be a fun discussion. You're going to start seeing more. For the casual fan, you're going to start seeing more sexy names. You're going to start seeing, and that's the kind of the goal of this, right? Like we want to start with the larger groupings, kind of the people who still need to be appreciated. And hopefully we kind of, turned you on to maybe go look up some information on these players, or, just even for the upcoming season, which is supposed to start December 22nd, according to the latest news. Keep an eye on some of these guys, and, we certainly will, and we'll figure out how right we were, which we're probably spot on, Austin. If I
would say we're 90, 97th, 98th percentile in terms of, correctness for sure.
So, yeah, absolutely.
At least.
Well, Austin, we are going to transition now to the closing segment where we talk about the work that we got going on and just, thanking everybody, all that fun stuff. Cool. What do you have in the works for us? I know that you just, I think it's so cool that the both of us here on Breaking the Game podcast, which is an NBA show, we both have extended our creative, juices out into the realm of football. Right now, what project do you have going on to help out with our network's football program?
Well, I'm going to be doing, every week I'm going to be doing a fantasy football article where I kind of just give you some, good picks and tips of who I think will have good weeks, some guys that you can kind of stream off the waiver wire, things like that. I'm not going to sit there every week and tell you, oh, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are great plays, because obviously, you're not going to sit those guys down. I did find it interesting though, and I wanted to, kind of humble brag a little bit to my, on myself. I was looking at my current fantasy roster, and in terms of ESPN leagues, throughout all the ESPN leagues that there are this year, only 2 players have been started in 100% of their available games. They're Kyler Murray and Alvin Kamara, and I have both of those guys on my roster. And
there you go.
Probably why I'm doing pretty good.
It's they be on the same team in real life like that,
right? Oh man, that'd be lethal for sure. Murray had another big game today, and Kamara's playing here in a little bit, so we'll get to see how he does.
Murray's a future MVP,
right? So there's that, and then also we're getting going on having a podcast and live show for fantasy football as well. I'm actually going to be doing kind of a test episode with a possible co-host later this week, so that may or may not ever go live or be available to people. That may just be for the vault, but if it is, sorry everybody, but if not, maybe you'll get to see how that one went. But we're going to test out, one episode together, see how we feel, see how we do. And hopefully if that goes well, we'll have a more, concrete start date for when you guys can expect to see that show every week. But it's going to be a little bit fantasy, a little bit like DraftKings daily fantasy, kind of your basic, year-long fantasy league. We're going to, go over some dynasty stuff. I'm going to talk a lot, at least I think a lot compared to other fantasy shows, about individual defensive players and kind of how to value those guys for a lot of people that don't, normally play with IDPs. But it does make it a lot more fun. It is add another big, huge wrinkle into it. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of sports betting, at least one of my picks every week that I think win you guys some money. So that's really all I have going on for that. I've probably talked a little bit too much about it. So Steven, I'll let you get into what you've got going on.
No, that's totally fine, man. It makes me happy to see, all the work that you've got going on. And it's just cool. Like I said, it's cool that the basketball, obviously other people on the network like basketball just as much, if not more than we do. Right. But we basically solely only started out doing basketball. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's cool to me that both of us kind of came up with ideas.
Shows our creativity and our ability to adapt.
Yeah. We got to be valuable all year long is really what it comes
exactly.
to. So, but yeah, so talking about your football show, we just did one called See You Sunday, where we record every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock Eastern time, 8 o'clock for all you West Coasters out there, where we preview every game from that Sunday, so the following day from when we record, all the way up to that next Thursday. So we get you ready for those. We talked about, key matchups that are happening this week. We revealed our games to watch. We revealed our picks. I successfully, picked the Buffalo Bills this week. So, I'm going to break myself on the back. So
you deserve it.
Yeah, but I'm not going to tell you about the other games that I picked, though.
Well, but, if you guys want to go see me be wrong about just about every pick I made, go ahead and check out the show this week. I think I made one or two good picks, but that I called the Bills my biggest pretender, and they came right out and showed me how wrong I was.
Beat one of the biggest contenders in the NFL, right? So it was a good game. A lot of factors go into it with travel and whatnot, but that's why I picked the Bills. But go and just be ready for that. That'll be available on Off the Ball Network, Facebook. So go to facebook.com/Off the Ball Network, and those will be available there. Like I just mentioned earlier, I just posted up an article just yesterday where I went through and let fans know how worried you should be on where your team is drafting this season based on how they drafted in previous years. So it was a lot of fun, did a lot of homework and research. Go through there. It's a good history lesson for all you NBA fans out there. So go and listen to that. So
it was a really interesting read, man. You definitely did a good job with it. You deserve a lot of credit for it. I will say though, if you're expecting your team to kind of draft the future face of your franchise where they're drafting, you might want to think again. There was a lot of names that I had never even heard of, so it'd be interesting to see.
There's only one player, Golden State Warrior fans, rejoice as if you don't have enough to be happy about, right? But Rick Barry, who is one of the Mount Rushmore players for the Golden State Warriors, was selected with the 2nd overall pick.
Right. And I guess, Minnesota can be excited because the only other time they picked number 1, they got Karl Anthony Towns, and he's pretty solid. So
he's only one of, I think, 4 players, if I remember, 4 or 5 players that was drafted and is still on the team that pick where they're picking this season, right? So like Darius Garland is still around where he was selected, Rui Hachimura, other players like that. Frank Ntilikina is still with the Knicks, right? So it's a good article. I mean, obviously I wrote it, right? But go to offtheballnetwork.com, check it out. Go check out all the other great work that folks are doing. Our Vice President Jeff Hunt just had a show today where he, talked about his Buckeye remix, which is, I'm not even a Buckeyes fan, and I love that show because Jeff does a great job with the visuals, with the graphics, with the video. I said earlier, he inspired me to do the video today. He's a very creative guy. He's a great personality, and just overall, just a good guy in general. So
and those rankings of his are looking a lot better week in and week out, if you ask me.
Yeah, everybody just his power rankings, both professionally and on the collegiate level, are always great. I love seeing people say something sideways to him about a team, and then that weekend they're just wrong about it. It's great stuff.
What's the point? I've never understood the thinking behind a power ranking where you rank a team that absolutely has no chance to make the playoffs ahead of a team that could, even if the record. There you go. The records don't say so. I like the way he does it a lot.
Yeah, his are very weighted and unbiased too.
Feel free to jump in on the conversation behind all of those, because I know they get a lot of people kind of going back and forth about where he ranks certain teams. So it's definitely fun.
The last time I looked at the numbers, he was up to like 14,000 people reached on his latest, just the NFL one. I haven't even checked out the collegiate one as far as the numbers go, but it's a great stuff.
Hopefully people get into, get into our NBA player rankings, at least similar to that. I don't expect the numbers to be probably quite that high, but a guy can dream, so definitely if we left off one of your favorite players or somebody you think belongs in either of our bottom tiers that we didn't mention, like Steven always says, get a hold of us on Twitter, ask us about it and give us your thoughts. We always love to, see what you guys think about what we say on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to kind of put the show to a halt. You can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram right here on these links right here, BTG NBA Pod. Hit us up on our Facebook page that we have. It's facebook.com/BTG NBA Pod. You can hit Austin up at AustinCar10 on Twitter. You can hit me up at StephenBTG on Twitter or at Stephen W. Gillespie on Instagram. Hit us up. Please go to the website. Go support the shows. Go support everybody. Our podcasts are great. I listen to our podcast more than already established guys. Like I still do listen to those, but I listen to ours more just because I just think that you get something different from where you get anything else.
You'll learn something from all of our guys' shows, and you'll have a good time learning it too. It's not just cut and dried fact after fact after fact. These guys that we work with have a lot of personality for sure. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just thank you guys so much for all the love and support that you give us. Austin and I, we love doing this, twice a week.
Yes, we do.
As much as we can. We love writing. We sit down and put in a lot of effort into these shows. We're going to get you guys out of here now so you can go watch the Bucks beat the Saints.
Yes.
I think that we both agreed on that, right? Go Bucks.
I think so. Yeah, I think we both took the Bucks. Yeah.
Yeah. Go Pirates, right?
Right. Go Bucks.
All right, Austin, say something nice to the folks.
Hey, thanks for taking time out of your weekend to listen to us ramble about our, where we rank NBA players. Like Steven and I always say, we love doing this for you guys. We love doing it just because it's fun for us. But, if we didn't have anybody to show it to or talk to with about it, it would kind of be pointless. So you guys are what kind of drives us to keep doing this. So thank you very much for listening and supporting the show in whatever way you do.
Right. And as we always say, go be kind to one another. Don't be a racist. Be nice to everybody. I know that times are a little bit, conflicting right now. Just rise above it. Starts with you. Right. Go out and be the change that you want to see in the world.
No matter what, your neighbors are still your neighbors.
That's right. All right. Well, guys, watch this fun video and we'll talk to you guys later. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.